Unexpectedly becoming a caregiver for a loved one can be a huge and draining experience. You want to do everything you can to help your ailing loved one, but you can quickly become utterly exhausted, going on empty fumes, anxiety, and uncertainty. Today, Sarah Cart, journalist, wife, and mother of four, shares her experience of becoming her husband's caregiver. She found herself quickly pivoting to this new and demanding role and assumed her life as she knew it was behind her. Stay with us.
Welcome to Lean to the Left, home of no holds barred commentary, plus interviews with fascinating people, some of them top experts, others simply with interesting stories to tell. You'll never know who'll show up at Lean to the Left. Now here's your host, Bob Gaddy.
In her new memoir, On My Way Back to You, one couple's journey through catastrophic illness to healing and hope, Sarah explains how she became one of the 39 million Americans taking care of an ailing loved one when her husband Ben needed an immediate heart transplant. Sarah shares their love story and Ben's heroic work to heal and how to cope while simultaneously processing, triaging, and coordinating as a caregiver. She shares how she was afraid of losing the love of her life while still trying to keep her own head above water, while all the while educating herself about organ transplants. She offers advice for those finding themselves in a similar situation, and with On My Way Back to You provides a life-saving primer on caregiving for those who find themselves suddenly in that role and simply are unprepared. Sarah was raised and educated in New York and New England and wrote for multiple local publications while she and Ben raised four sons. Upon becoming empty nesters, they moved to the Florida Keys. Then came COVID-19, and Sarah says all hell broke loose. However, with Ben undergoing miraculous life-saving measures, they've been afforded the unanticipated gift of a future. Sarah, thanks for sharing your story with us on the Lean to the Left podcast.
Thank you for having me, Bob. I'm delighted to be here.
Hey, tell us what happened to Ben, Sarah. When did you realize that his health was deteriorating, and what did you do?
It was really subtle at first. We were at a family wedding, and as everyone was applauding and clapping, at one point I realized that Ben, who always whistles on such occasions, was doing it differently than usual. It was typically a one-handed fingers in the corners of his mouth, and this time he was using his other hand. And I didn't ask him immediately what was going on, but in the car on the way home, it was, what was that about? Why is your whistle different? And he mentioned that his fingers had been a little swollen off and on for a while. You get into those conversations with someone you know really well about how long is a while. And he says 2 weeks, and you think, okay, so it's probably 2 months.
Yeah.
And what else is going on? And there was one other slight thing. His fingers were also changing color if he was moving from one air-conditioned room to another that wasn't, or vice versa. And I nagged him until he went to the doctor, and that led to blood work, and that led to a diagnosis of this odd autoimmune issue. And okay, that's weird, but we were told you just manage it symptom by symptom. And Ben, the scientist in him, was really fascinated by, okay, so I take this medication and that solves this problem, and then there'd be another diagnosis and there'd be another medication and that would solve that problem, or there might be this side effect. And we were moving along fine until he got a diagnosis of congestive heart failure. And that really was a gut punch for him, because that was what had been on his grandfather's death certificate. So all of a sudden we knew we were in the big leagues.
And Ben was how old at that time?
57, and just irrepressibly energetic, and
Sure.
You know, his nicknames were the Ever Ready Bunny and Tigger. He was always had the camp counselor, team leader, energetic personality. So it knocked him back.
It's amazing, though, that you spotted that symptom of just the difference of his whistle.
Yeah, it was. And I don't know that if he hadn't whistled, how many more weeks, how many more months might it have been before we noticed something? And it was just really, I mentioned it, it got mentioned to our doctors as we went in for our flu shots. And the doctor said, I'm not giving him a flu shot. We're doing blood work instead.
Wow.
So,
It's
yeah,
amazing, though, how when you've been with someone that you love for all these years, you become so attuned to every little thing that they do.
for better
And,
or worse.
and when something's different, you know it.
Yeah,
And you know something needs to be checked. And
yeah.
that's just amazing. And that probably saved the man's life.
At that moment, yeah,
Yeah.
it gave us some lead time.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
How did the COVID-19 lockdown affect all of this?
Frankly, I think it saved his life. If it weren't for the pandemic, he would have died.
Why do you say that?
We had learned, so after the congestive heart failure diagnosis,
Hmm.
he got a life-saving pacemaker. That was great. We were back on top of the world. And the pacemaker was keeping up for about 6 months. And then we
Hmm.
were losing ground significantly again. And we were told that the only thing that was going to save his life would be a heart transplant. So we started running the hurdles to get him on that list. And there was some question as to whether or not his autoimmune issue would preclude that because it was migrating through his body from organ to organ. So if we
Hmm.
gave him a new heart, was the autoimmune issue just going to say, oh, great, thank you, and feast on that?
Yeah.
2 weeks after the world shut down, Ben's kidneys shut down and he ended up in the ICU. And they did stabilize him, and they finally put him on the list. I
Okay.
couldn't visit him because of COVID, and I hoped that they'd send him home, and we now that he's on the list, you'll send him home, and we wait. And they said no because he's got this. They'd put in a pump to help his heart, and then they had to put in a second pump to help his heart, and then he got so unstable they took him off the list on Good Friday, put him back on the list on Easter. This is all April 2020. And 3 days after Easter, he was unstable again, on the verge of being removed from the list when a transplant coordinator walked in and said, we have a heart. And he went into surgery the next morning. And the only people who were getting transplants at that point, the only people who were being wheeled into ORs and hospitals all around the country were the people
Hmm.
who were either in an emergency situation needing an appendectomy right now, or they'd just
Hmm.
been gunshot wound, or they were in the hospital dying because they weren't calling people and saying, hey, we've got your kidney, we've got your
Right.
whatever, because they didn't know. The COVID tests were still taking 4 days to get results. And so the hospitals were really shut down. They didn't have any volunteers coming in, no visitors coming in. The medical staff was all stressed beyond imagining.
What type of work does he do, Ben?
Ben is an entrepreneur. He and a partner started their own small oil and gas business in Ohio back in the mid 19. They would recycle shallow wells. They'd change the timing on them. And if the well was too old to be saved, they would pull the pipe, and there was a secondary market for the pipe.
Okay.
They called themselves Sanford and Sons. That wasn't their real name, but when they were trying to explain what they did, and they did a lot of work with the Ohio EPA, making sure that wells were responsibly shut in. And
Okay. Was he working during this time that all this happened?
he had to file disability and retire. It was a forced retirement. Um, with his partner's blessing and support, they had been very proactive about what would we do if one of us had a stroke or a car
Right.
accident or who knows
That's
what.
a good thing.
And we never expected that we'd have to exercise the disability claim the way we did. Ben was so out of it that, in fact, it was Ben's business partner and I were the ones who did most of the paperwork. Um,
What did all this do to you? All this you had to go through. This had to be just extremely traumatic for you. How did you cope? What'd you do?
I am a writer by instinct. It's how I process stuff.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of journaling. Once he finally went in the hospital, part of my journaling, I focused it on writing emails to immediate family and friends so that
Mm.
everybody would be in the loop and on the same page. I took up meditation, which people who know me are really surprised. It must have been incredibly stressful if you found the time to sit down and meditate, because I'm
Why
typically
why do you say that?
oh, I don't sit still very long for anything.
I have never been able to figure meditating out either.
Yeah, it was a free meditation series that Oprah Winfrey and Deepak Chopra sponsored during the beginning of the pandemic, and it was
Okay.
3 weeks of 20 minutes a morning.
Hmm.
Um, one friend kept saying, you should do this, you should do this. And finally, after she'd been nagging me for a couple of weeks, I started with day one. And I
Hmm.
believe the message was, there's always a reason to keep hope alive.
Okay.
And I can't remember what the message was on day three, but day three was the day they called me and said, we've put him on the list for transplant. So I was like, okay, there's something to this. I'm going to keep talking to the universe. The day after his transplant, the message was all about rebirth and having a new heart. And it was, wow, it was really freaky. So,
That is freaky. And
yeah,
that's really kind of spooky.
yeah, yes. There's a lot of spooky stuff that went on with this. While he was in the hospital and going on the list and off the list, and there were times when he didn't know who I was, our communications were dependent upon the nurses facilitating FaceTime.
Hmm.
And I would just ask the universe, everybody we know, wherever you are, all the people we've lost and who loved us, to please come back to this little corner and focus your light and love on Ben and help him get through this. So I would ask his really practical grandfather, and on the other side of his family, his really practical grandmother, please stand by his head and help him think clearly. And the other grandfather, whom I never met, but the stories I heard were always about this very loving, kind person. And the other grandmother, whom I adored, I'd have them stand at his heart and help his body accept this new heart, that kind of thing. I asked the donor to be there too, my brother, yeah, everybody, high school friends, people we've lost and loved, to please come back and love us through this crisis.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. I don't understand. You asked the donor to be there? The guy
I
didn't have.
ask the donor, please, wherever you've ended up in the universe, I don't know who you are, but please, whatever energy you can focus on this person who's alive, thanks to your family's grace and generosity. Yeah, please come back and help us. So,
Okay, I got it now.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. It's not where I usually go, but it's where I found myself in that. So,
When you said I asked the donor,
yeah, yeah, I can see how
that would be a
yeah,
real trick. The guy's dead.
it put me on the cover of the National Enquirer.
Oh, I wrote for them once years ago. One time I did an article for him.
That would be
And
fun.
yeah, on another topic, I'll tell you about it sometime. Uh, all right, let's see here. Brought me to this question with your talk about asking people to show up and help, whether they were with us or not. You've said that becoming a caregiver requires a deep well of faith, grit, and grace. You want to expand on that a little bit? What you mean and how those qualities sustained you through all of this?
They helped me to, for lack of a better expression, do the work.
Uh-huh.
If you're lucky, there are days when you're able to progress 2 steps forward, and maybe you get two of those days in a row. But then there are days where you slip 5 steps back,
Hmm.
and another day you slip 5 steps back, and it's just, I don't want to do this anymore. Um,
Right.
and on those days when you don't want to work, you have to do it anyway. You just have to choose higher and to grow and to overcome. And you find, especially once he was in the hospital and I couldn't go visit him, that there were days when I was making so many decisions, big and small. Needed his hearing aid charger, and so I had to ship that to the hospital. Where is it? How to find it? Oh, maybe I'll throw in a Sharpie marker too. But then you're also making decisions. You're signing consent for procedures that you've just heard about for the first time an
Hmm.
hour ago, and it's been made clear to you that this is a life-saving procedure that is necessary, has
Hmm.
to happen immediately.
Hmm.
And then you're thinking a little farther forward and wondering, can he come home to this house? Can we keep living where we are? Or do we need to be talking about, do I need to be thinking about assisted living and home health care and nurses and all that kind of thing? So
Right.
it's just exhausting. And so the faith and the grit and the grace, they also remind you to be gentle with yourself and to allow you to cry when you need to. So it's, I,
I like what you just said. Gentle, be gentle with yourself.
yeah,
Mm,
you have to be.
yeah.
You're not going to get it right. There is no way to be a caregiver
Yeah.
and do it perfectly. I got a phone call. Had anyone mentioned this fractured left hip? And No, in fact, nobody had. He'd been in a bed in the hospital for almost a month at that point, maybe a month, and they hadn't noticed it. But I could tell them that I suspected I knew when it happened, which was 4 or 5 days before he went in the hospital. He was unbelievably exhausted, sleeping really horribly, and he fell asleep walking back from the commode in the middle of the night to our bed at
Hmm.
maybe 12 feet, went over like a tree. I slept through it because I was exhausted. And a
Right.
couple days later, I noticed he was taking ibuprofen like it was jelly beans. So it was just a kind of unbelievable glitch. I'm sorry,
Sounds
I can't
to
remember what your question
No,
was. I
that's okay.
lost.
Sounds to me like he was and is a tough guy.
He is
You
a tough guy
you said that he there he is. He's got a broken damn hip, and
and didn't know it.
didn't know it, and he's sucking down ibuprofen,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you notice that. I know what that's like. I got a bad hip. I had a hip surgery, and it still hurts. And so I don't know what pain he must have been in.
He was in excruciating. In the hospital, when he was first in the hospital and they weren't making him move, he wasn't.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
was after he came home because they did the heart transplant. He's in the hospital recovering from the heart transplant, and then they put you through cardiac rehab so you can learn in a rehab situation from a wheelchair, in his case, how to manage himself in the kitchen. They had a little miniature apartment, and I did get to go see that. How to get in and out of bed, how to get in and out of the shower, how to get in and out of a car, which
Right.
was hugely helpful because that's how I got him home. And he, through all of that, was dealing with the broken hip and had been on opioids for 2 weeks by the time they sent him home. And the hospital was great about saying, he is now technically addicted. We are going to have you talk with pain management people. And there was this, he had to ask himself, is my pain on a scale of 1 to 10 worse than a 6? If it's worse than a 6, I can take the oxy. And if it's less than a 6, I'm going to do it with ibuprofen.
Hmm.
Um, and we did that right up until he was able to get the hip replaced, which was 2 months after he came home.
So
And
not only did he have a heart transplant, he had a hip transplant.
yeah, yeah. And
That's
the,
a
and the night they did his hip transplant, as there was a tropical storm coming into Florida,
uh,
and he was supposed to spend the night in the hospital. And because everybody in the hospital knew him so well and had experienced his determination, even when he was out of it, they
right.
said, you can take him home. So his hip replacement was outpatient surgery. I took him
Wow.
home. The
Uh,
surgeon called that night to make sure we'd gotten home safely, called the
yeah.
next morning to make sure we were doing okay,
Uh-huh.
called the morning after that, at which point I said, yeah, but he's in such bad pain. And the surgeon said, what are you doing with the medications? And I said, we're still at the 6 or higher. He said, no, this is why we paced you all summer. This is when he should take the meds every however many hours it was.
Right.
And he did, and it was great. And 2 weeks
Yeah.
later, we're in the surgeon's office, and Ben says, that was great. Once you told me I could take the meds. And the surgeon
Mhm.
said, that's wonderful. I'm not renewing your prescription. Ben came home and he counted the pills. He had enough to go for another 6 weeks, but he was off of them within 10 days after that. He weaned
Yeah.
himself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but you had asked about whether or not I was depressed. I
Yeah. That's right.
finally, I finally, after the hip replacement, and once he was finally learning to walk again, I went and talked to somebody and who said, quite honestly, you're going through PTSD and you are now the patient who needs to be cared for,
You
which was
talked to
a
somebody.
lovely and generous thing.
Who was the somebody you talked to?
It was a doctor down here in Florida who'd helped a son of ours a few years ago. And I
Okay.
just called him and said, hey, can I come chat with you for a while? I only went and talked with him once.
Uh-huh.
And his advice was basically, when you get up in the morning, just ask yourself, what will give me joy today? And if it's possible, do that. So,
Wow. Okay.
yeah, it was
All
really,
right.
really lovely.
So that helped you out a lot, probably. Huh?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. Now, what advice would you have for other family caregivers who find themselves in a similar situation?
Don't put up any barriers. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable. Be gracious and accepting of people's attempts to help. Not everybody knows what to do. Some people are going to say things that sound stupid or rub you the wrong way. Just appreciate that they're trying to do their best to be supportive.
Oh,
When people ask how things are going, Don't try to exaggerate or sugarcoat. You don't want to have to walk back anything if circumstances change.
Mhm.
And again, be kind and forgiving of yourself. Give yourself breathing space where and when you can. So
Sounds like good advice. How did your community support you during all of this? Did you have some help with people, friends, and
it was COVID, so I couldn't really have people come in. But my friends and neighbors here, I'd open my front door and there would be dinner. There would be a box of tea. One woman
uh,
gave me a watercolor of flowers because live ones won't last, I think was the note that she included with it.
uh,
Um,
oh, nice.
and then on the long distance side of things, because our family was far away, most of
Hmm.
our lifelong friends were far away. My first time on Zoom was actually the night Ben ended up in the hospital. A friend on the West Coast was having a Zoom birthday party. I've never heard of such a thing. It's amazing to me to think that there was a time when I didn't know what Zoom was.
Yeah,
And
that is amazing, isn't it?
isn't it?
Yeah.
And then within days, I was Zooming with our boys and other
Mm,
friends and family up north.
right.
My book club from Ohio, because they suddenly found themselves Zooming, got in
Hmm.
touch with me 10 years after I'd left Ohio. I was Zooming with them. And it was wonderful to interact with so many people and to realize that everybody was going through something. We were all going through COVID, but we were also all going through other things as well. Um,
Yeah.
so
Okay. What do you want your readers to take away from your personal experience?
that there is always something for which to be grateful. And when you pray for miracles, recognize that sometimes the miracles you get will be different than the miracle you prayed for. But as for the gratitude, it might be something as simple as the roof over your head, or having a clean t-shirt, or having a dirty t-shirt from the laundry hamper that reminds you of the person you're missing.
Mhm.
And this one, again, this is like meditation. People would say, really, Sarah was doing that? But it never hurts to give yourself a pep talk.
Yeah.
Um, I adopted it from a friend, good friend, our best man. We
Mhm.
were with him one weekend and he put down blueberry pancakes at breakfast that he had made. And he just said, great job, me. And we all looked at him and went, what are you? He goes, I do that. It's a positive affirmation. Okay. Wow. That's a little, but I found myself saying, let's go, me, or you can do this, me. Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Get up and do it. Pull
There
yourself
you
up by
go.
your bootstraps. Do it.
Sure. There you go.
And there were a lot of variations on that in the book, but it really helped. Right before I brought Ben home from rehab, the entry in my journal was "Let's go us." Um,
Good for you. Good for you. I find myself patting myself on the back every once in a while.
it's really useful and helpful.
Yeah.
I'm really glad Pete shared that with us, even if we do give him grief for it.
Well, I'm not by any stretch of the imagination a cook, or there's my dog scratching himself.
I see, Boomer.
Boomer. Yeah. Yeah, I decided the other day that I wanted to make a cannoli cake. I found a recipe.
Oh,
Uh,
excellent.
Jackie it was laying around in with her recipes, and I saw it, and I thought I love cannoli, so let's try a cannoli cake. So I made it, and
Terrific.
it turned out great, and so I patted myself on the back.
You
And
might have to send me the recipe.
oh, sure, absolutely. And I'm one of these people that I don't read directions very well. I tend to just do things, and
That's a challenge in baking because
it
baking's kind of chemistry.
it is. And the recipe had said to mix this stuff up in a certain way. And I didn't see that until I had already mixed it up. And I hadn't done it the way the recipe said.
Was it
And
edible?
oh, it came out, you'd have never known.
Oh,
You'd have
good.
never.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And what it was, you had to make, let's see, you had wet ingredients and dry ingredients.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they wanted them mixed up separately and then blended together. And I just put them all together. But it worked
Yeah,
fine.
sometimes they want you to put a third of the wet in and a third of the dry
That's
and a third of the wet. Yeah.
that's right. That's right.
That's a time wasting thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's a bunch of
So
crap.
unimportant.
Sure. But let me tell you something. That cannoli cake was delicious. And So if you could go back and give yourself advice from before Ben got sick, what would you tell your former self?
My first reaction to that question um, brings up an answer that implies a crystal ball and the ability to predict the future. And that is, you are strong enough for this.
Right.
You're stronger than you think.
Uh-huh.
But because none of us knows what the future holds, the real answer has to be live for this moment
Hmm.
and treasure it. We tend to think of life, our society highlights life in bullet points: births,
Hmm.
weddings, gender reveals, graduations, promotions. And when in fact, the nitty gritty is all the stuff that happens in between the bullet points. So, my advice, and it's hard to even begin to comprehend what it means if you haven't been through a whole lot of stuff, but the advice would be rejoice and be glad in this day and whatever blessings it brings.
That's great advice, especially from someone who didn't know if her loved husband would survive. You had a That had to be extremely difficult for you.
It was, but we had the time to prepare.
Hmm.
Um, so many people don't get that time, especially during
Yeah.
COVID. So many people lost loved ones and didn't have the time
Yeah.
we had. And yes, I was his caregiver, but he made a point of caring for me too.
Okay.
He spent a lot of time making sure that I knew the practical stuff, like lessons in plumbing, those were fun, and automobile mechanics, those were fun as well.
Wait a
Household.
minute. What the hell was he teaching you about
Oh,
automobile?
just like when the light goes on, you really ought to call and
Oh,
ask what the check engine thing is about.
oh, okay. That
It's
gets
not, there aren't going to be bells and whistles. They're not going to call me. No, you probably ought to call them. How to handle the household finances.
okay.
We were not 60 yet. He was pointing out to me when I would have to start paying attention to Medicare,
Okay.
um, and those sorts of things.
All
I mean,
right.
he was really preparing me to be on my own. And
Wow.
um, while I was preparing him, helping prepare him for his exit. It was,
Wow.
yeah, it was tough. But today he's wonderful, and we got our miracle, and it's amazing. And he's annoying, and I thank myself every time, or I thank him every time he annoys me. It's amazing. And I thank myself. Way to go, you.
All right. That's just great. So he's doing okay then, right?
He is.
Is he back at work?
He is not back at work. I'd say where he used to do a sort of A plus work,
Yeah.
sitting at his desk, he's about a B plus now.
Oh,
But
okay.
he's found a new passion, which is croquet. He's trying to convince our doctor that he plays something called cardio croquet because it's got no cardio exercise involved in it whatsoever, but it's what he likes to do. Um,
Croquet?
croquet.
Wait.
Basically, he's always loved pool, so croquet is life-size billiards. Um,
Wow.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. So that's croquet. That's with the little hoops out in the yard and
Yeah, the
everything.
wickets out in the yard. Yeah, in Florida, they put a lot of time and energy into making sure that the croquet court looks just like a golf green, very
Oh
flat,
my, really?
yeah, very smooth
Okay.
grass. Yeah.
Okay. I'm glad to hear all that. That's great news. And I really do appreciate you joining us on our podcast. Do you have any other words of wisdom for folks?
The only other thing I would say is if you've already indicated to your loved ones that you're willing to be an organ donor, thank you. If you haven't, I hope you'll consider it.
Okay.
And again, share that wish with your loved ones. We
Hmm.
lost a very good friend suddenly 27 years ago, and five patients were positively impacted, and the ripple effect for their families was just tremendous. And we are forever grateful to the suffering family who, in the midst of what have to have been their darkest hours, so graciously and generously shared their tragedy, turned
Wow.
their tragedy into our miracle.
That's incredible.
So,
Okay, Sarah, listen, thank you so much for being with us. I appreciate it.
okay, thank you, Bob.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this Lean to the Left video and that you found it interesting and informative. Please visit on a regular basis and check out our interviews with guests on topics that focus on progressive politics and the important social issues of our time. Now, our interview shows stream on Mondays with special episodes on Thursdays. And you can check out upcoming shows, guests, and topics at podcast.leantotheleft.net. Subscribe to our audio version there and to our video shows here at YouTube. And follow us on social media. Facebook at Bob Gaddy and the Lean to the Left podcast. Now, it's two. Bob Gaddy is one Facebook page, and the Lean to the Left podcast is a second Facebook page. Twitter at Lean to the Left 1. Instagram at Lean to the Left 1. TikTok at Lean to the Left. LinkedIn at Bob Gaddy. And YouTube at Lean to the Left. Now, I hope you'll support Lean to the Left as well so we can keep things going. Just click on the Donate tab at the top of the leantotheleft.net homepage and contribute by buying me a cup of coffee. That'll really help and would be much, much, much appreciated. Now, this is Bob Gaddy signing off for Lean to the Left. Thanks for sharing your time with us.